what does it mean to be truly optimally healthy? I'm not just talking about being pain-free, feeling good, having good lab work or anything like that. I'm talking about accessing and expressing the fullness of your human potential. That's pretty much the topic of this week's podcast on the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter, and thank you so very much for taking the time out of your day to be with us. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. Just a reminder to subscribe, rate, review, let us know what you think. Really excited to share this conversation with our guest, Stef Sifandos. Stef holds degrees in behavioral science, philosophy, and a master's degree in sustainability and commerce. He is also qualified in areas of neurolinguistic programming, Psyche, Vira Tantric principles, masculine ethos philosophies, hypnosis, and Reiki, and more. Would have loved to talk about all of these, subtle aspects of Stef's background, but our conversation focused more around being an integrated human being. And what I mean by that is, masculinity and femininity and bringing it all together into this human experience. And while Stef and I are both men talking about masculinity, this conversation is very pertinent to any human being on this planet at this time. While we're talking about being a man and masculine and masculine energies and feminine energies and things like that, this isn't only for men, of course. Like, these are universal principles that are really important to understand in order to live into our fullest potential. So we talk about what that means, and we also talk about our society and how we are transcending some old toxic beliefs and ways of being, and how in doing so we are living into an integrated society. So this is a really fascinating conversation. Curious about what you think, so would really appreciate a rating and review, give some feedback, and let me know what you think. So without further ado, why don't we all just sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Stef Sifandos. All right. So Stef, welcome to the Alter Your Health podcast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Privileged to be here, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I've really resonated lately with a lot of the content that you're putting out on social media. And I think it just speaks to a lot of people in a deep space for specifically maybe to the masculine in the world. And I'm really, it's a pleasure to connect and bring this into the light more so. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I will tell you that the way that I became familiar with you and your work is I actually know kind of peripherally your partner, Christine Hassler.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's how you came into my perspective. And I was like, wow, if she's with this guy, he must be a really awesome guy. I better take this guy seriously.
I think the same thing. I think she's with me. I must be okay.
Well, yeah. So anyways, that's how I know you so far, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit more deeply. So if you would maybe just set the stage and tell us like who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So my service in the world and what I'm deeply inspired by is essentially transformational change. And so really at the simplest level, it's moving from an undesirable state to a desirable state, and just really assisting people to do that. And for me, I've really learned over the years, we teach what we need to learn the most. So I'm really learning frequently how to move from undesirable states into desirable states of being that make or allow me to be more open. And when I'm open, I'm creative, and I'm just really engaged in loving life a lot more. And I'm able to then pass that on to the people that I come in contact with, whether it be virtually, whether it be physically in person, and so forth. And so the niche, if you like, within that is really looking at relationships and how can we healthily relate to ideas, to belief systems, to ourselves, to our own past, to our experiences, to people, to intimacy in what I call sacred union. I'm not the first to call it that, of course. but really deep, intimate relationships. And how can we expand those, and how can we make those flourish? Because I'm a big believer, and I'm sure there are many other mentors, guides, coaches, authors, etc., thought leaders that really feel very strongly about conscious, healthy, engaged, connected relationships. They have a tremendous propensity to create greater peace in the world and alleviate suffering and bring us back into a greater sense of homeostasis and really expand and evolve humanity at another level, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, physically, relationally. And so in a nutshell, that's my service. My story is, I've got many aspects to my story. I don't know which part you would like to hear, of course.
Yeah. Well, something that you already said that kind of spoke to me is that we teach what we most need to learn. Yeah. And I think that's so true. And so based on that kind of very interesting fact, what is it that you're learning in your teaching most? What's the most depthful thing that you're learning recently in what you're teaching?
Yeah, I'm learning how to be a more present man. I'm learning how to be a more present human being and not assume so much, because we're very, very good. The brain neurologically is very good at creating assumptions, categorizing, compartmentalizing our reality to keep us safe, to help us understand the world in the fastest way possible, to ensure our survivability physically, psychologically, etc. And so what I'm learning is just really slow down and just look at life and observe life and be a witness to life and myself and my inner paradigm, my inner being, and also what is happening outside of me without being overly assumptuous. And I'm learning to breathe. I'm learning to relax the physiology at a greater depth. And because of that, I'm able to really be present to what is unraveling in the moment. So there's more, the word is really presence. What else am I learning? I'm learning willingness. I'm learning, what am I willing to dive into? What am I actually willing to learn? What am I willing to be present to? What am I willing to understand? What am I willing to sacrifice, for lack of a better term? What am I willing to want to be? And so willingness plays a major role in my own life and also what I teach. Because if we're not willing to delve into our fears, into our pain points, into our shadow self, into the unknown, then we really remain stagnant. If we're not willing to celebrate our wonder, if we're not willing to celebrate the gratitude that we have in our lives and the appreciation and what we actually are exposed to in this age, in this era, then we're stagnant in our growth. Or growth is a moot point. And so for me, the prime directive of life and living is to grow, is to have new experiences, is to do things differently, is to not be so bogged down by our past conditioning, not be locked down by that. And that's the only rigid way to be. And so what I'm learning is that there's so many different ways to act and behave and think. And so I'm altering my belief systems in real time as I'm teaching others. I'm learning from others' life experiences and I'm assimilating that, and I'm being really observant. I'm slowing down and becoming more attentive, and I'm moving with deliberate intent. So I'm moving with greater clarity in my world. And so when I make decisions, it's not coming from a place of confusion, pain, and misery, or fear, unconscious fear, or even conscious fear. It's coming more often than not, coming from a place of confidence and clarity. And something deep that I teach the men that I work with men and women, but the specific men's work I do is about becoming vertical. And vertical encompasses confidence. It encompasses clarity. It encompasses this ability to know oneself. And so I'm seeing myself communicate so much more clearer in relationship, especially my intimate relationship with my fiancée, Christine, as you mentioned earlier. I'm learning to be more present to her needs, to not be reactive and rather be more responsive and calm in my demeanor if she's communicating something that I may be perceiving to upset me, because that's life, right? That's what happens in relationships sometimes. So I'm learning to really be more open to what is being communicated as opposed to interpreting that communication. And so that's some of what I'm learning as I'm teaching and just moving through the world in general.
Yeah, love that. So if we could back up a little bit, and if you could share a little bit about, like you already said, your story, I'm sure has many facets, but what are some of the things that you've experienced in your life that have really directed you to come into the work that you're doing more fully here
Mm.
today?
Mm. So I work with many men, and I look at how men behave in the world. I just look at how people behave in the world, including myself. And what I notice is, and this is, I'm not the original person to say this, what I notice is many times our greatest voids become our greatest values. So what we didn't receive during our formative years really becomes something of great importance in our adult lives. And so the gauge of healthiness in relationship to that thing or that experience or that embodiment that we wish to have as adults is really dependent on our interpretation of those experiences or those voids. And so for me, I felt very isolated and disconnected as a child. I grew up in a fairly violent family. It was an emotionally and physically abusive family. And so I felt very distant from people. I didn't feel I could speak my voice. I didn't feel I could say my truth. I didn't feel I could just be me. So I had to learn to sort of disguise myself and put on all these different masks. And I got very confused. And so, you know, some of my greatest values as an individual today are around clarity, are around connection and intimacy, are around unification and wholeness, and not around separation and segregation, not around being distant from each other. And so I went through many years, though, being in an unhealthy relationship to those things that I wanted. And so instead of pursuing them in a transparent, honest, open way with clarity and with non-attachment, I was pursuing them with tenacity and aggressiveness. I was pursuing them with aberrance and even violence sometimes. And so I was very disconnected. I was pursuing connection, but very disconnected in the pursuit and the embodiment of connection and of that thing that I really wanted most. I spent much of my life in my intimate relationships really being dishonest, being unfaithful, not being connected, not knowing myself, not speaking my truth, just really repeating what I was when I was younger in a different way, shape, form, expression. And so it wasn't until a few years ago that one of my relationships became unraveled, and it became very apparent and known that I was behaving in a way that was not conducive to the health of the relationship. And I was out of integrity. I was dishonest. I was unfaithful. And so I made a choice then to be a very different man, be a different person, and just ask some quality questions like, who do I really want to be? Who am I? What man do I want to be? What does it mean to be a man? What does masculinity mean? And see, I'd been looking at all these concepts from a very young age. I'd been interested in Eastern philosophy and Eastern mysticism and Western philosophy and the mind from a very young age. And so I became very cognitive and intelligent per se, but like cognitive intelligence, but I never really carried any much emotional intelligence in certain scenarios. And I lacked the embodiment of what I was learning and what I was being exposed to, and also what I was teaching and coaching at that time as well. And so there was a massive disconnect in my life. I was really relating unhealthily. And so, and I couldn't figure out why could I build something and then it would just burn down? And I was the common denominator, but I couldn't make that connection. I would blame and shame externally. Oh, it's the market's fault, or this is what happens in business, or the market's slow and there's just not enough people in the demographic that I'm looking for in the city that I'm living in, or whatever it may be. So I was just repeating patterns that my father had really instilled in me. And this isn't about blaming my father. This is about me taking responsibility for the environment that I was in, and then being an adult and being mature enough and aware enough to be able to make some changes. And it wasn't until I really hit rock bottom that I was able to make a choice to make some changes. And I made deep, deep changes, and it completely transformed my life. I looked at my peer groups, at my values, my beliefs, my models of reality, the various masks that I was wearing. It was a very confronting time for me, and I really immersed deeply into healing and therapy and self-awareness, and spending a great deal of time on my own with myself, understanding, learning who I truly was, so that I could be a more coherent and connected human being for myself and for my community, essentially, the global community, our global family.
Mm-hmm. This whole world of personal growth and development, it sounds like you've been pretty immersed in it and connected with it for quite a while. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Is it kind of this? Sometimes I feel like it's kind of the same old stuff, taking different flavors and different, there's different personalities who are sharing things. But what in your mind has been the development of this, personal growth, self-help category of, transformational coaching and these kind of things? How have things changed from your point of view in the whole field of transformational coaching?
It's definitely become more monetized. It's definitely become a more expanded industry. And with that has come some negative per se, but there's a great deal of positive that's come from it as well in terms of what we've been exposed to now, some of the amazing teachers out there and the amazing wisdom. Essentially, Benjamin, for me, we're all saying the same thing. We're all, when you really peel history back and you peel collective wisdom back, like we're all speaking to the same thing. And so it just presents itself in various expressions. And that's a beautiful thing, because we are diverse beings. We're individual sparks and expressions of a unified consciousness or a unified reality. And that's a very probably deep rabbit hole and conversation for another time. And we can go down there if we need to. And we're all saying something very similar. And so but we're also attracted, because of our personal experiences and our interpretations of the experiences that we've had in our lives, we're attracted to different things, different people, different personalities, different verbiage. And so there seems to be a movement towards individuals really wanting to up-level themselves, really wanting to shift their pain with the advent of technology and globalization, the internet, social media. We're far more connected than we've ever been. And the negative side to that is that we're sort of engulfed and consumed by some of these expressions of connection, such as social media, where we're losing the ability to physically and intimately connect with people in that way as well. And so that's maybe a negative aspect of it. And the positive is that we can talk to people and really communicate like you and I are now, that we've never met, and have really deep conversations. And then you take this information, this audio visual information that is quite, it stimulates our senses, and you give that to your audience of a few hundred, a few thousand, a few 100,000, a few million, it doesn't matter. And then now you're impacting lives with this conversation. Is it going to resonate with everyone? Maybe not. And that's okay. Am I going to resonate with everyone? Probably not. Definitely not. Are you? Definitely not. However, we will resonate with some people that may, I was talking to my friend Connor yesterday. We were having this conversation around impact. And I said to him, you don't know that maybe one of your clients, he's a transformational coach, for lack of a better term. One of your clients could be the parent of the next savior, quote unquote, of the world. Or someone that makes a massive impact because you're impacting them, and they're taking that wisdom, impacting their family or their child that they're upbringing. They're bringing up, they're growing up to be an amazing human being. And we don't know that. We can't see that. We don't have the foresight. We do, but we can't access it most of the time to really understand that. And so when you're talking about where's the transformational industry or space and the personal growth space gone, where is it going? I think it's going in a really healthy direction in terms of expanding humanity. In about 12 to say 36 months time, let's just say 24 to 36 months time, there's going to be another 2 billion people with access to the internet from developing nations. Mm-hmm. That level of creativity and thought that's going to go into the ether, into the collective thought paradigm, is going to be massive. Massive. Different cultures, different interpretations of the world, into that big melting pot of ideas. Just that alone, that's transformation. That is the transformation of the personal growth industry. And we sit with that for a moment and we think, wow, that's powerful.
Totally.
So where do I think it's going? I think it's shifting lives. And I think there's also some shit that comes with that. And that's life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. That's a really powerful thing to consider. Just the, I like to consider, like you mentioned, just the ripple impact that one conversation can have throughout the world. But yeah, when we take it to even a greater level, to consider that these sort of conversations are becoming accessible at the fingertips to people in the smallest towns and the corners of the, corners of the globe. It's just crazy. Totally crazy. And I remember several years back, I was doing a lot of reading and learning and studying, and I felt like I was kind of reading the same thing over and over. I would, every time I'd pick up a book and open a book and read something, I'd be like, I know this. Like, it's just someone, with a different personality saying it with a slightly different flavor. I get this. And at that point, I was like, close the book, and I was like, I'm done reading for a while. And I didn't even read anything for quite a while.
Mm.
But then I became, I don't know, then I started to resonate with the beauty of people's flavors and how a flavor can be something so beautiful that I can connect with. It doesn't have to be something totally novel and new. And because there isn't anything new at this point in life, we're all connected. We're all sharing the same ideas and same creative potential. But it's that beautiful framework through which it can come. And yeah. So I'm curious, I've heard you speak some to the transformation of consciousness, for lack of a better term, and living into a healthier, accessing our healthiest potential, not only physically, but just our emotional intelligence and our acceptance and universal love and compassion, and just being accessing and expressing our divine nature and connecting deeply with that. I'm curious what that realistically looks like, what we're living into, and what it actually looks like on a personal basis, but also on a communal, global, kind of societal basis.
I think at an individual and at a community, larger community level, it's much of a muchness. I think the momentum is a little bit different though. And so as an individual, I come back to willingness and interest. And so if we are to become holistically healthy, we have to have an interest in that. And to have an interest, we need to begin to explore. And so this exploration of the self, of the mind, of the body, of relationships, of what we value in life, of the emotional being. If we're noticing a pattern it's just paying attention as well, it's awareness. If we're noticing a pattern of pain or ill experience that we're having over and over again, what are the common denominators besides self, of course? What are some of the common factors that are taking place? Beginning to understand ourselves is really important. And it's important because it gives us access to a deeper, broader, wholer version of self. And so this whole version of self that we have access to really comes from a willingness to be challenged, essentially. We live in a very, so at a collective level, we live in a very, from a Western framework speaking, generally speaking, Western democratic framework, we live in I don't want to say lazy society, but we live in a short-term gratification society, and one that a great deal is done for us. And so we have apathy around effort. And effort is underrated. Like, it's so underrated. And if we don't carry a growth mindset, an open mindset into the lives that we live, we become very restricted by our own demise, by our own choices. And so life just gets too hard. So it's easier to distract ourselves and be busy, quote unquote, with TV, with work, with alcohol, with unconscious distractions, whatever they may be, than to actually delve into self, clear some of the internal clutter that we have, maybe some of the emotion. Not everyone has emotional baggage, but most of us do. Clear some of the relationships or the interpretations or the associations that we have with past experiences that haven't been the healthiest for us, that we have pain around, and begin to live a whole life, like begin to exercise and move the body. This is a physical vessel, and the physical vessel is made to move. Emotions are made to move. They're not made to remain stagnant. They're made to be expressed. The way the brain works with the body and the mind, the emotional being, and so forth. And our spirituality, we're beings of belongingness. I want to say that again. We are beings of belongingness. We are connected beings. We're pro-social beings, learning how to be efficient, effective, connected in a social environment is so important for our mental and physical health, because we know research demonstrates that our mental and emotional states influence our physicality, influences and impacts our cellular infrastructure. And so taking interest in the whole person, that includes our physical environment, and being willing to then sometimes exert effort plays a major, major role. At a community or global level, we live in a society of hierarchy, whether we believe it or like it or not, we do. And part of that is having large corporations and government as leaders in our society. That's where we are at the moment. And then there's tiers within that as well. And so it's the responsibility of these self-proclaimed and self-assigned and assigned by community leaders. And I'm speaking to obviously one framework of geopolitical or socioeconomic structure here, mainly around Western democracy. It's the responsibility of these groups and these organizations to take leadership and really present the truth and do the absolute best to present a non-biased view of what it means to be an effective, connected human being and society. And sometimes we're very easily swayed and influenced. The ego is very easily swayed and influenced. We experience greed, we experience pressure. There's a disconnect between the way our government operates and the way our earth operates and the way people think and feel as well. And so again, this is a very complex conversation. I'm doing my best to condense here. But coming into this sense of being interested in the self, then being willing to act on that interest, and having some resilience and courage to traverse some difficult times. But the payoff is tremendous. I've experienced it personally. I experience it with the people that I work with. I experience it in observing certain pockets of the world. And we can really grow and come into a more grounded state of being.
Yeah. I mean, I'm working with people, primarily supporting people in accessing their fullest health physically, and supporting people with healing predominantly physical ailments. But one thing I often ask people is, all right, so if we heal physically and if you don't have any more pain or symptoms or whatever the primary complaint is, like, then what? Then what are you going to do with your life? Then what are you going to do with your body? Then what are you going to live into? And it seems like that's, obviously you do focus with people physically, but it seems like you kind of start with the physical person, and then you're taking them into the higher dimensions of health.
Well, it's tangible. The physicality is tangible, Benjamin. I love that you start with that and that you really focus on that. And for me, it's a focus as well. Like, our physicality is so tangible. And so it's a great reference point. People can relate to it with greater efficacy. Where you're talking about unconscious or immaterial things, it's more challenging for people to relate to. So people can see and really experience directly an embodiment of health, positive, net positive, healthy results from an undesirable state that they've been experiencing into a desirable state, then they become inspired to search deeper. Oh, what about this? I might think about this. I'm always angry, or I wake up in the morning and I'm really upset. I wonder what that's about. Let me look into that, as a simple example. Or I'm really frustrated at work. Is it work? Is it me? Is it the people? Is it the city or the place that I live in? What is that? And then people can explore these ideas, these thoughts differently. But having an experience of success in the body is paramount. And in fact, this is our vessel. Like, we need to look after our vessel. Like, this is it. This is what we have.
Totally. I'd like to maybe shift the conversation to masculinity. I know it's like you and I, we're both, embodied in masculine bodies, but I know that masculinity is not only expressed through male bodies. We all beings have a masculine energy that we're expressing and connecting to. How would you define the masculine energy?
What a loaded question. So firstly, I want to give a little bit of background. And so masculine, feminine energy is simply their expressive states, two sides of the same coin, as an example, or as a metaphor of every individual. So we all, as human, sentient, conscious, aware beings, carry this masculine, feminine expression. It's linked to a sense of dualism that we experience in the world, like a realm of opposites, sort of up, down, ground, sky, black, white. I mean, black and white aren't really opposite per se, but it's this dichotomy, this position that we have.
Yin and yang. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like Shiva Shakti, depending on what a tradition you look at. And so we all possess this. And so your original question of what does it mean to be a masculine man?
Well,
In,
I don't think actually I was more asking like how would you define masculinity, not
great.
necessarily in a man or a woman or
Yeah.
anything, but
Okay,
how would you
great.
define
Great.
that energy? And then maybe
Yeah.
we can come into what
Yeah,
it means to
yeah,
be a man.
yeah. So I look at that. I look at that energy as as a as a set of expressions, and so as a set of expressions that allow us to know ourselves with greater depth. That's for me. And in a sense, so part of that is being grounded, being assertive, being clear, uh, possessing direct energy, being very directive in how we move through the world. This becomes very, very powerful for how we see ourselves as well. And so the opposite is true for the feminine. So we can't define the masculine without also understanding and at least to some degree defining the feminine. So some characteristics of the masculine energy: presence, warrior energy, having clarity, being powerful, being an admirer, being reverent. This is the energy of the masculine. Being what I call vertical, which is a combination of confidence and stability and safety. Being discerning, being introspective, magnetic, purposeful. There's a myriad of characteristics. Focus, having like very deliberate focus in life. Functionality, dominant. There's a dominant energy that comes with masculine presence, and that can be unhealthy and it can be healthy. And all of these, by the way, can be expressed healthily or unhealthily. Being objective, being goal orientated, the competitive nature of the human expression, being expansive. You know, the soulful. So the masculine is soulful, the feminine is heartful or heartfelt. Fierceness is part of the masculine. Analytical, cognitive intelligence is part of that masculine energy. Exploring energy. Let me think more. There's quite a lot there. There's quite a few.
This paints a really good picture. I think we've got a good kind of place to start. And I mean, I'm familiar with all of this, but you know, just for maybe listeners who might not, who might just simply associate masculine with a male body or something
No,
like that.
definitely not.
Or
Definitely.
masculinity means
No.
penis or
No, definitely not. Definitely
yeah,
not. Well, not
yeah,
in my research and understanding, and also my own practices as well. So if I'm
yeah.
like in a very assertive space, I'm simply just in a masculine, a dominant masculine expression. If I'm assertive from a place of healthiness, and what I would add to that is, am I being inclusive and sustainable in my assertiveness? Am I including others in my assertiveness? Or am I being hyper selfish and ego driven? Am I being sustainable in my decision making around my assertiveness, or am I being, again, exclusive? So does my decision making have longevity, or is it simply for the short term to satisfy my ego, my immediate needs, because I'm coming from fear? If we're coming from fear, that's an unhealthy place. So there's healthy and unhealthy expressions of one of these characteristics as well, which we have to take into account, as the example I gave you then.
Mm-hmm. So when does things become unhealthy? When do things become unhealthy? Because I've heard a lot of people talk about toxic masculinity in this world today, and how the masculine is this, you know, you use some characteristics like dominant and you know, you didn't use the word violence, but masculinity is often kind of entangled with violence. And, you know, it's mainly men, I guess, in our
It is.
society, at least, that are being, you know, expressing violence. So how does masculinity, this divine energy, get wrapped up into this toxicity and to be expressed in such a way that we're so familiar with in our world?
Yeah, so this is an interesting conversation. The term toxic masculinity, and there's two different camps. Essentially, those that agree with the term toxic masculinity, and those that don't. And I want to get away from the term for a moment, just to simplify.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, because what happens is because we get caught up in the terms and the verbiage and in semantics, and it's like, let's move away from that, because there is also toxic femininity, for another term. All toxic means to me is unhealthy extreme behavior. That's it. If something's toxic, it's unsustainable, it's exclusive, it's hyper selfish, it's extreme in its movement and behavior and expression, and it's unhealthy. That's it. And so that's grounded in ego, that's grounded in essentially fear. So if we behave violent and we behave aggressive, it's because we are coming from a protective place. We're coming from a fear-driven place. And usually it integrates the ego as well. So when we're hyper self-absorbed and hyper selfish and we have a careless attitude towards life, we're being unhealthy. And if we sustain this behavior, it becomes toxic to ourselves, to our own sense of evolution and self, and to those around us, to our relationships. So we need to get away from being attached to this term. Oh, don't say toxic masculinity because it infers all males are toxic. It does not, definitely not. And we need to get away from the semantics and actually get to the core of it. And so when we're being unhealthy in our masculinity, we're not being sustainable, we're not being inclusive, we're coming from fear and we're coming from ego. We're coming from a place of scarcity. And we do this, and as a byproduct of that, or the expression, the extension of that, is oppression, is subjugation, is violence, is extreme aggression, aberrant behavior against women, against self, against society, against children, against earth. There's this deep prejudice and judgment that takes place. And this is unhealthy beingness. And it's unhealthy masculinity because the healthy aspects or expression of that is assertiveness and is leadership and is mastery. That's the healthy expression of being dominant. There's nothing wrong with being dominant. It's how we be dominant that defines us and defines, are we on the spectrum of health or not health?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting that there's nothing wrong with being dominant. And it really, I guess that's sinking in for me, because if we've got two people and there's not a dominant person, then there's just going to be two people who are just sitting around maybe doing nothing, or maybe, painting pictures. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but but it requires some dominant force to move.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a masculine energy.
Yeah.
And so when we talk to this, so let me give you an example of an unhealthy dominant energy, like an unhealthy dominant energy in the masculine. We can say a man, he's the one that lives in a world where he thinks and he believes that the world and women are there to serve him. And he becomes a womanizer, and he has an inflated sense of self-worth and notoriety around himself. And that can lead to perversion and sexual violence and extreme behaviors in this space. This sense of grandiosity, this greed and self-interest like at any cost. That's unhealthy dominance. That oppression, subjugation, that's unhealthy dominance. Healthy dominance takes form in terms, again, leadership, mastery, confidence, inclusion in the decision-making, but confidence in one's decisions making as well. The ability to be compassionate, understanding, empathetic, and listen to others. Listen to the counsel. Listen to the counsel that a man has around him. Listen to his peers. Listen to the woman that he's speaking to and that he adores and loves so deeply. Taking all of that into account, and then being self-reliant and making decisions in his own sovereignty, in his own individuation, because he trusts himself. The unhealthy toxic man doesn't trust himself, therefore doesn't trust the world, therefore behaves aberrantly. The healthy man who is not toxic, or the healthy individual, trusts themselves, therefore can trust the world. That at its simplicity is it.
Love it. Love it. I really appreciate you for kind of rising up against, or rising up with, toxic masculinity, because this term and the verbiage around it, like you were talking about, just kind of, it like cuts, I feel like it just indiscriminately cuts down men in our world. And I've felt for quite a while now, just being a white, straight male in this world, like I'm kind of like, I'm, kind of up against the wall at times. It's like, it's challenging times. I'm curious what your thoughts are about, being a white, straight male in this world, and, what your feeling is with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple of things I feel and think about that. So first is that I'm under no illusion or no assumption, and I did a dissertation of this in university as well, that I carry white privilege. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm a healthy man. I'm in a demographic of middle class, upper middle class, whatever it may be. I'm again very healthy. I'm male. I speak English. I'm part of the we call it the dominant group, cultural group in the world.
Mhm.
I'm under no illusion that I'm experiencing white privilege, and so there's this term, this academic term of whiteness, and I'm a man, and so I'm technically as well the dominant gender. So I'm under no illusion that I come from a place of privilege, and we have to take ownership of that and understand that. And these are very deep, permeating cultural norms that are systemic in our society and influence the way we behave at unconscious levels, the way the government interacts with society, the way media is portrayed, the way corporations do business, everything. And there's great subtleties in this. And so a couple of things. One, I also know that I've been the dominant gender, race, etc., for many, many years, for thousands of hundreds of years. And so there's an oppression that's come from that at a collective level in my past, in my history, in our history. And so that influences how we're perceived today. Massive studies have been done on this, on how many of us actually are racist or discriminative. And it's so unconscious in the brain. It's how the brain is compartmentalized. It's how we've been conditioned to view other people. It's beyond our conscious control until we become aware of it. Then we can make it. We can condition our brains and ourselves and our behaviors and our understanding of the world and our models of reality to be more inclusive and less separatist, less segregating in our ways. And so what I think of it is I think I'm very blessed and privileged. And because of that, I feel that I need to speak for myself and for those that don't have as a powerful voice, and promote more and more what I feel is unity consciousness, inclusivity, where there's greater equity, not equality, because we're made different, and that's fine. We can celebrate equality, we can celebrate our differences, but equity in terms of our access to resources, distributed justice, and so forth. And not be influenced by the subtleties of history and the subtleties of discrimination. And so we're at a time right now in the world where there's a great deal of access to information, and people are really rising up to create greater equity. And I see the world changing massively from the way that we interact with our earth, and we extract resources, process resources, distribute resources, the way we treat ourselves, each other, bringing greater equity into our society as a whole, the way women are perceived, the way women perceive men, like so much is changing. And I really feel we're experiencing the most peaceful times we've ever experienced as a society. There's something to be said for that as well. And so that's an opportunity where there's some space where we're not fighting so intensely at such a large scale. There's an opportunity for us that we have space now to be creative with how we rise into the next evolution of collective humanity and as individuals as well. So I hope that somewhat answered your question. It's a very complex. So I love the questions you're asking, brother. Like, these are deep. These are really deep.
Yeah, it's interesting. This conversation it's a good one. I really love it, and at the same time, it's so different than the typical conversations I have on this show. And I think we'll have to see if we get some feedback off this conversation. Yeah. But I think it's a good stretch.
It's a stretch.
And you brought up this idea of white privilege, which I really love your response to it. You feel it, you embody it, and you know that, like, sure, you've got privileges in this life. And I really feel similarly, like, with privilege comes responsibility. And that's what I hear you saying is you feel this responsibility to use what you have in this world to express from a place of equity and just bringing, you said it better than I did.
I mean, the empathy and the compassion, Benjamin, is that, you and I will never know what the subjugation a woman experiences systemically or unconsciously, or a child or an elderly person, because there's separations in our society there as well. Or a person of different race. Like, we'll never know those oppressions. Not in this life anyway. And if you believe in multiple lives, and you can remember them, then maybe you've experienced that. If that's where you've been, but we'll never know that. And so I don't claim to know that pain, and the pain that I do experience and know is the pain of segregation that I see. and the pain that I've experienced in my own life of isolation, being isolated from myself and my family and so forth. But again, that's very different to collective racial oppression or collective gender oppression as well. We don't live in a society where men or and again, I'm very careful with this term that I was about to say, patriarchy. I'm very careful with the term, the terminology around patriarchal lineages and patriarchal systems and so forth, because again, it's another one of those terms like toxic masculinity that is misconstrued, and the focus is on semantics and it doesn't exist and so forth. And be careful with that term as well. The reality is that men have been a dominant gender for a long time at a greater collective, and a great deal of that has been through unhealthy, oppressive ways. It's evident with the way that we interact with our environment, like our ecology, which actually sustains our life. Like, you know, when we say about the body, it's our vessel, it's our vessel for consciousness to move through, or to, whether you believe in a materialist perspective where the brain creates awareness and consciousness and mind, or whether you believe consciousness is something that's already existing and the body's an antenna, et cetera, irrelevant. But the point is that this vessel, right, it allows us to experience life. Ecology in homeostasis, homeostatic environment, allows us to experience life as well. And when we look at how we interact, again, how we extract resources, how we be in this world, like we're killing the forest, we're polluting our oceans, we're polluting our lifelines, our skies, our atmosphere. Like, there's poisons in our soils. We're running out of fresh water. I don't want to say that, but fresh water is being polluted. That is truth. That's a fact. And so, we're not really efficient. It's more like, let's make money. Again, nothing wrong with making money, but when making money comes at the expense of living a healthy life, like, it's a bit of a paradox, an oxymoron. And then we invest billions and trillions of dollars into technologies to save us. Like, if we took a preventative approach, we wouldn't have to have a curative approach. And so all of this is intertwined, and this is unhealthy masculine and feminine expression in the world, largely unhealthy masculine, extreme masculine expression of this do at any cost. So doing energy is a masculine energy. Being energy is a feminine energy. This is doing, accumulating. That's a masculine energy. Mm-hmm. Exploring and conquering, masculine energy. We're doing it at extremes. There's no balance. There needs to be greater harmony. And so we're going to either learn through extremes, or Earth's going to kick us out and say too late. And we won't have the opportunity to learn, because Earth life cycles are in hundreds and thousands of years, not our life, not political cycles of 2 to 4 year terms, or human life cycles. You see the disconnect? Or human life cycles of 70 to 100 years. Yeah. Massive disconnect.
We're a total blip. We're a total blip in this universal cosmic picture. Amazing to think about. Sometimes I feel like there's this kind of swing, this pendulum, and maybe we've swung into some patriarchal extreme, using that word also. Sure. Do you think that we're swinging the other way?
I do.
And
It's not healthy.
Think that it's not healthy? Is that what you're saying?
Definitely not. It may be necessary, but it's not healthy because it's an extreme. You're looking at, boys and men don't know what masculinity means anymore. Like, we're losing that. There's such a blur between what it means to be a man. And is that wrong or right? It's not wrong or right, but we're definitely moving to extreme where boys are becoming hyper feminized by certain values. Is it wrong or right? Not necessarily wrong or right. It's not about that, but it is becoming extreme. Is it necessary? Perhaps it is. Perhaps the feminine has been so suppressed for so long, the only way to be heard and seen is to come back into an extreme, and then at some point come into a pendulum, into the balance point of the pendulum. That was my experience. I was extreme in my behavior, and I had to hit rock bottom, extremes, to be able to come into a homeostasis, to really be more balanced in my expression. So I don't judge it as it's wrong or right. It's not the healthiest posture, but it may be necessary for society to actually hit a balance point. I just hope that Earth, and we're not destroying Earth at such a rapid rate that it's too fast for our sense of consciousness to elevate.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm curious. You say it's maybe not the healthiest, but maybe necessary. So what do you think the healthiest stance or expression is for a unified, integrated consciousness embodied on this planet at this time? I mean, I hear that your intention is to live that as an example and teach that. but maybe if you could articulate
Mm.
a little bit about what that looks like and feels like in the world.
Yeah, mutual reverence and respect as a starting
Yeah.
point. And so, what does that tangibly look like? Is that we're genuinely giving a voice to women, and it's not tokenistic, and it's not just bullshit.
Mhm.
It's a real voice. And so, again, what does that actually look like? So, for me, I'll just speak to my personal experiences. So, for me, it's moving away from this archaic, unhealthy, dominant male expression. And so, in my intimate relationships, I'm the man. My opinion is the only one that matters. I'm going to make all the decisions. Your opinion's irrelevant. Like that was a lot of what I experienced in my life growing up, in my peer groups, and also in my own family, and in my culture as well. And so, like breaking that and saying, you know what, darling, when I'm speaking to Christine, your opinion is just as important as mine. Let's work through this collaboratively together. We're having a problem. We need to discuss something. How do we discuss this? How do we move through this? Like, what's the best way to move through this? And being really collaborative in that. And that comes back to inclusion. It comes back to genuine, sincere inclusion. Because we all have, we think that because, here's one of the associations, the mistakes that we make. We think remember when I said to you, tangible is easy? Physically tangible is easy. It's a very strong reference point because it's right here. Like it's tangible, it's physical, we can feel it.
Mhm.
So the same applies for an unhealthy expression. Let me explain what that means. Because males, because their biological and hormonal infrastructure is different to females, we are generally speaking, by the vast majority, physically dominant, physically stronger. And we make that association that because we are physically stronger, we're better. We're better human beings. We're more adept.
What do you mean? We're not? I'm just kidding. Joke. I just had to
Everybody
bring a
calm
little
down.
bit. Just had to bring a little light. All right.
Love it. And so this association is made that we're physically dominant. And because we're physically dominant, we're just better. We're smarter. We're more emotionally intelligent. We're just everything. We're just better. So therefore, we should take charge and lead because we're going to lead our civilization to the prosperous golden gate. And so, wrong. It's got nothing to do with that. The only reason that we have that capacity is because we're able to recognize it in the other. That is a reference point. There's a polar opposites, right? Because you can't. What are you stronger than? Otherwise, like, what does it mean to be strong? Because on another planet, let's just say there's a species on another planet, they would look at us and we would be weak. Now, would we then want to be oppressed and subjugated and be treated less than? Because that's essentially what we've done in so many pockets of society throughout history to women. We're having this masculine, feminine conversation. That's what's happened. And the whole paradigm has allowed that to happen. And so what we need to do is really recognize the qualities, valuable qualities in all human beings. And if we're just sticking to a binary gender conversation here, men and women, just for simplicity's sake, we'll do that. There's so much value in women, so much value in men, and it's different, and some of it's the same. Some of there's a crossover. Compassion is a feminine expression, as an example. It does not mean that men are not compassionate. Some of the greatest human beings alive have been the most compassionate. Jesus Christ as a story. The Buddha as a story. Whether it was real, physically real or not, irrelevant. But let's look at Mahatma Gandhi. Let's look at Dalai Lama in terms of compassion. These are men, males. They're males, carrying great compassion in their being. And so we need to begin to recognize that we carry different and similar values and value, and we can rise together in greater unison. And when we really acknowledge that and embrace that, that's the power there for us.
Yeah, it is powerful. Thank you for articulating that. Sometimes I have this ideal that we just simply look clearly through our gender and just see everybody as a human being. And I think that we're a little bit, that would be lovely, but I think that we're a little bit ways away from doing that. It's because the fact of the matter is we are uniquely different, and that those differences are very important for procreation and so many other things.
it's hard to have that conversation with minority groups and subgroups of society. And we you know, I don't know if you can tell by my accent, but I'm not exactly American. So I live in the US, in Southern California. But I grew up largely in Australia and Greece and Australia. And so we have this conversation, this collective conversation in Australia, and it's not loud. It needs to be louder. It needs to be a lot louder. And it's not loud because of various reasons anyway, because essentially Australia is by large a racist country, as are most white Anglo-Saxon dominant countries. Anyway, so we have this conversation around Indigenous people, Aboriginal people there. And part of that conversation is that Aboriginal people, Indigenous people get so many benefits. They get too much benefits, too many benefits. Like we're talking about socioeconomic benefits. And why should they? And this is what some of the camps are saying. I'll just shake my head. I'm just thinking to myself, if you'd been oppressed and experienced mass genocide only not that long ago, like literally in the last 30, 40 years, like you may need a little bit of a hand to elevate yourself back into society and have some level of integration. And so these are some of the conversations that take place. And so when you're talking about these extremes, sometimes we may just have to go to these extremes to get that balance again. And it's a really hard conversation, Benjamin. And it's one that's really tough to have on so many levels. Mm-hmm. And we need more, quote unquote, minority groups having these conversations. And we need to assist them in elevating their voice as well. And elevating voice that is against the status quo. And the status quo is separating. The status quo is a segregating voice, a segregated voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we're really talking about I'm feeling is just what a healthy world looks like. And I think it's so important to hold a vision for what that healthy ideal looks like and just hold it, set it out there and be detached and just intentionally move towards it and model it and just encourage people along. But I think it's so important to live into that vision. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for having this conversation, articulating it, because this podcast is typically more focused on individual health. But as I always share, our individual health is only dependent on the health of the greater community and the health of the planet, of course. So this has been a really great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm just curious if you could leave us with, sometimes I like to ask if you could articulate one sentence or message or lesson that you think the vast majority of people would benefit from hearing and learning. If you could, I don't know, put it up on a billboard or, shoot a viral YouTube video, I guess, something like that. What would that message be for people for it to sink in and for people to really integrate at this time? In this life?
Be willing and open to adopt a new and different mindset, belief system, model of reality. That's it.
I love that. Be willing and open to adopt a new mindset and model of reality. Yeah.
A different one different than you're accustomed to, one that is very different to yours. Just be willing to be open to it.
Awesome.
That's where substantial transformation takes place.
It's interesting because what I hear and feel when you say that seems like a very feminine openness, the openness to, not
to receiving,
to receiving.
Yeah.
But
the only way that receiving can actually be received in an open way is through a very stable and solid container. A vertical container, which is masculine.
Yeah.
And that's the integration.
That's the two. The two. Awesome. Well, where can people find out more about Sifandos and what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you, Benjamin. Yeah, my website, Sifandos.com, or my Instagram or Facebook handles are Stefanos Sifandos.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stef, for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed this conversation. Thought it was deep and meaningful. Got me thinking and feeling. and I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, brother. Thank you.
Peace and love. Till next time.